Hello Internet, and welcome to another episode of Experimental Cataclysm, the show where we talk about recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. Jumping right into it here, first up today from Fool's Gold 45, we had a series of PRs described as description cleanups. I couldn't remember if we had talked about this previously or not, and I wanted to mention it here. This set of PRs went through various item descriptions, fixing up grammar, missing punctuation, awkward phrasing, things like that. This is an example of the sort of tedious grunt work that usually goes unnoticed, but it is a necessity for the project to look good and run smoothly, and having awkward or difficult phrases or bad grammar, those things can also negatively impact translation as well. So yeah, I just wanted to offer a shout out for all the people over the years who have fixed typos and reworded things. We appreciate you, even if, generally we fail to appreciate you. But right, anyway, next up today from mlang42, we've got the addition of flagpoles and the ability to hoist flags. I remember that we had discussed this on Discord a few times, but it had not been added to the game, and now, huzzah, it is. There is a wooden pole which you can construct yourself, and there are metal flagpoles which only appear in existing locations. The PR added these metal flagpoles to a decent number of places, but I still expect they're going to be somewhat uncommon. Now, partly this is because in real life lots of places don't really bother with flags, and partly because we have a staggering amount of map gen locations, and so just like RNG wise, they probably will not be super common. They were added to locations that you would expect, like schools, post offices, etc., and the PR suggests that you can just drop the flag on the flagpole, and through, tile set magic, it will be displayed as hoisted. Now it's Sunday as I write this, trying to get an early start this week, and currently it does not work with all tile sets. And then just to come in here with an edit, these tile sets were recently updated to allow for this to work properly. So for instance, in Altica, all I have to do is drop this American flag on the flagpole and it will be displayed as hoisted. The problem here is that it only works for flags that have their own independent sprite, so if I drop, say, the pride flags on the ground here, you'll see they just appear as a crumpled, I think that's the blanket sprite. So now, even though we have the ability to display flags using these tile set layering system or whatever that's called, unfortunately it still only works with flags that have their own sprite, and again, it does depend on your tile set. Obviously something like Retro Days is a little minimalistic, probably won't have this functionality, but yeah, I just wanted to mention Altica here specifically because that's what I use, and that's, a default tile set for the game. Next up today from Lil Shining Man, we've got the addition of 8 bungalows. These were done over 4 PRs, and there's really not much that I've got to say about it. I just like seeing map gen. What is the difference between a bungalow and a house, you ask? Well, not much really, aside from bungalows reminding me that Dead Island exists. Despite having many house layouts in the game, they often feel pretty samey, and it's just nice to see more expansion there. Plus 8 of them in rapid succession. Obviously this is someone who is motivated to add things to the game, and I'm happy to see that. Moving on, next up today from Crow, we've got the addition of some modular headgear for the Hub faction. Now I don't typically engage very much with factions when I play, so forgive me if I don't know every detail about the Hub, but to my understanding the Hub has their own sort of branded armor. I mean, I know they do, I guess. I think they all have Hub right in the name, but apparently they didn't really have any helmets or headgear for that particular type of outfit. So Crow has added modular Hub helmets, but the naming convention is a little confusing here. It took me a minute to kind of realize how this worked. Essentially, there is the base headgear item and then modular helmets that fit into that headgear for additional armor. However, these inserts are simply named helmet, but they're actually like helmet inserts. They can't be worn on their own, so this confused me a little bit. Anyway, you'll be looking for a modular recon headgear which you can wear on its own. This can then be toggled by activating it, and it will switch between no goggles, night vision goggles, and IR goggles. Switching to a different goggle type takes no time, but as with all similar eyewears, you do have to pass a turn before it will start working. Once you have the modular recon headgear, you can then insert in one of the Hub helmets. These do all have the same armor coverage, which, I guess that makes sense. They are inserts. They're going in a specific shape and space in that headgear. However, they do have different protection values depending on which one you're using. And then finally, as far as I know, these are only currently available through trading. They are not used as quest rewards or anything like that. And maybe that'll change in the future. Just, it's an overall pretty cool change. I think this is a modular headgear idea is a great idea, and I think it's been implemented well. Next up today from Spar, we've got a very slight change to the messages that pop up when you're using safe mode. Normally, the message would just say something like, hey bro, there's a zombie to the west. Now though, it will attach a distance to the message so you have an idea of how far away they are. If there are multiple enemies, it will tell you so and give a range of tiles to give you an idea of the overall distance. Now for most of us, this isn't going to change very much. To be honest, I know a lot of the more experienced players basically never use safe mode, myself included. It's probably overall worse for us to ignore it like that, but hey, I don't know, it is what it is. However, for new players, I think this is actually a nice little boon. When you first get started, before you learn how to quickly locate an enemy, I think this sort of thing will indeed be very helpful. So I like this, if not for myself, then for new players that are struggling to get their bearings, so good change. Next up today from David 2700, we've got 3 mutant dogs and puppies for those mutated versions. Also, this PR mentions some mutant cats that were added to the game a while back, one PR specifically from this year. Not sure how I missed those, I don't think we ever talked about them, so apologies for not ever talking about new cats being added to the game. Anyway, this PR adds a translucent dog, the triclopian dog, and the unknowable dog. These are pretty straightforward, but the unknowable dog is described basically as something that you immediately forget about after seeing it. And the other two are pretty self-explanatory, right? Translucent dog and a triclopian dog, three-eyed dog. Now what I really like about this PR is that they chose not to make them hostile by default. And I really appreciate that. I sort of dislike this notion that we have in the game that a mutated animal would suddenly become a ferocious anti-human killing machine. So you can actually treat these mutant dogs like any other dog. You can tame them, you can pet them, etc. Now there is something I wanted to note here, which is to mention that these butcher for mutant meat/organs. Not that any of you would ever butcher a poor pupper, but anyway, for instance, the triclopian dog is literally just a dog with a third eye. As we've gotten more and more mutant creatures, I've started to dislike that they all harvest for mutant meat. Now I do understand a naked mole rat, for example, the size of a minivan, is obviously undergoing massive forced mutation. It makes sense that they would have undesirable parts. But something like this that is essentially just a dog with a third eye, well, it doesn't really make sense that every scrap of meat and every organ is full of tumors and undesirable bits. Now that's not really the fault of this PR or something, but it's something I'm hopeful that we can maybe do something about in the future. It made sense to just have everything give mutant meat when it was first added. Most of our mutant animals are huge and wildly mutated, but lately we've been getting a lot more of a gradual change to our mutants, and I think this is something we should consider changing. I just don't know that every mutant creature needs to give entirely mutant meat. Moving on though, next up from the same person, we've got the Tearjerker Zombie. Very simple, this is a creature that when you kill it, it pops and releases a cloud of tear gas. Now in the game, tear gas is actually pretty debilitating. It blinds you, which is not a great place to be while you're fighting enemies. And this enemy does sort of leak clouds of tear gas behind it, but they do dissipate pretty quickly, so I don't imagine that'll be a huge issue. And when you kill them, or if they get close enough and blow themselves up, a big cloud is left behind. They do move somewhat slowly, but you should still be aware of them because again, being blind in this game isn't really where you want to be. Anyway, not a lot of thoughts here. You are probably used to dealing with boomers in the game. It's the same principle really, just with tear gas. The only thing I would say is that I don't think it makes a lot of sense for a zombie to be producing tear gas. They say in the PR that the description is to imply that they were pepper sprayed prior to their zombification. However, pepper spray is not tear gas, and it producing this chemical on its own is sort of what I take issue with. It was the same argument I had when we got gasoline zombies. I just don't think they make a ton of sense. But also tear gas zombie, it's, to be honest, it's fine. I don't really care enough to ramble at length about it or anything. They're fine. And then finally today, we've got about 1 billion changes from Illison related to the mutation system. Right up front, I'm not real big on mutation. I'm more of a CBM boy, so this is definitely not my area of expertise. I did reach out to the author on Discord, which I never really do, and then, people yell at me for not asking them questions directly. But yeah, they were very kind in explaining some of the big takeaways to me. Honestly, I was having quite a lot of pain that day, and these PRs were like a big walls of text, which is ultimately good. I would would rather see a descriptive PR than a really like bland and basic PR. But yeah, I imagine most of you have probably experienced that. You know, you get an email from work or whatever and you're just like, you can't parse what is being said. And then additionally, I don't really know what to put on screen here, so this might just be a lot of text, but anyway, let's talk about the takeaways. So first up, simple things. Nutrients were renamed to primers, so you'll notice these items now display them as such in their item entries. This isn't a huge change, but changing them from nutrient to primer, I think it's just a little clearer, and it was overall a good thing. Some things were temporarily not displaying their vitamin or nutrient contents properly, but Illison got that fixed very quickly. Now another simple thing is that you will now get interrupt messages when you mutate. So if you're crafting and your body suddenly shifts and you grow like a mushroom scalp or whatever the hell the kids are into these days, you will receive a pop-up. These can be disabled the same way as any other interrupt message, but I do think this is a nice little quality of life. There was also a lot of discussion on Discord about whether or not starter traits should be made purifiable. Now I personally am of the opinion that all traits should be purifiable, even starting traits, but that is generally an unpopular opinion and I do understand why. But anyway, despite discussions surrounding this, they were left alone, so purifier still does not remove starting traits. However, there were some issues previously with certain traits not being purified when they should be. This had something to do with dummy mutations. I don't really understand how that works, to be honest. I think it meant that they needed a dummy mutation category, but they didn't have one, and therefore they could not be removed, but don't quote me on that. But the gist of it is that apparently some traits, I believe a lot of plant mutations were referenced specifically, they could not be purified when they should have been. And this was a bug, and it has now been fixed, so as far as I know, any trait that you receive via mutation can now be purified properly. Radiation also had apparently not been working properly with mutations, and that has been fixed as well. I guess it had been functioning more or less as purifier, which was a bug obviously. Now radiation mutations should be fully functional again, and it should be completely random. It does not take your instability into account, it is truly a random mutation source. Similarly, genetic chaos and genetically unstable also do not affect your instability, they will have truly random mutations. Now I always thought that these traits were meant to be challenging and overtly bad, but it looks like that's not really the case. Chaos and unstable just sort of imply that you are prone to mutation. It doesn't have anything to do with whether you would mutate in a good way or a bad way. Genetic downward spiral is the one that is clearly bad. It's hard to interpret the phrase downward spiral as anything good, and that trait still is bad. It's not truly random. As far as I know, all of the mutations that you get with downward spiral will be bad. And I believe that genetic chaos and genetically unstable were also changed slightly here. Previously they were not working as intended. Apparently because they were hooked into instability previously, they would almost always just give you tons and tons of positive traits. This is not the case anymore. They are truly random. They don't factor your instability, as I said earlier. Anyway, that's the broad strokes. Again, really appreciate that Illison talked me through all of that. If you're interested, I will of course link to the PRs that I saw in the description down below. They were all pretty verbose and addressed other things that have a little less impact on your average playthrough. Again, these are pretty small impact, like they fixed the way the Rat King works, they changed some mutation messaging, and they made it so that vitamins can actually decay into other vitamins, which it doesn't really matter from a player perspective, but is pretty interesting. And with that though, I think we'll be wrapping the show. Everyone, thank you for watching. I of course will be back in a couple of weeks with another episode, so yeah, I'll see you next time.